She had some art of hearing and yet not hearing, the latter wisdom of the world. White was the only race she ever knew. Black she had scarcely seen, and yellow never. But how could they be made so very unlike by the same hand working in the same stuff? She had supposed the war decided that. What are you going to do with such a person? Strange how such innocence gets in its own way. I shouldn't be surprised if in this world it were the force that would at last prevail. Do you know, but for her, there was a time when to please younger members of the church, or rather say non-members of the church, whom we all have to think of nowadays, I would have changed the creed a very little. Not that she ever had to ask me not to. It never got so far as that, but the bare thought of her old tremulous bonnet in the pew, and of her half asleep, was too much for me. Why, I might wake her up and startle her. It was the words descended into Hades that seemed too pagan to our liberal youth. You know, they suffered from a general onslaught. And well, if they weren't true, why keep right on saying them, like the heathen? We could drop them. Only, there was the bonnet in the pew. Such a phrase couldn't have meant that much to her. But suppose she had missed it from the creed, as a child misses the unsaid good night, and falls asleep with heartache. How should I feel? I'm just as glad she made me keep hands off, for dear me, why abandon a belief merely because it ceases to be true? Cling to it long enough, and not a doubt it will turn true again, for so it goes. Most of the change we think we see in life is due to truths being in and out of favor. As I sit here, and oftentimes, I wish I could be monarch of a desert land, I could devote and dedicate forever to the truths we keep coming back and back to. So desert it would have to be, so walled by mountain ranges half in summer snow, no one would covet it or think it worth the pains of conquering to force change on. Scattered oases where men dwelt, but mostly sand dunes held loosely in tamarisk, blown over and over themselves in idleness. Sand grains should sugar in the natal dew the baby born to the desert. The sandstorm retard mid-waste my cowering caravans. There are bees in this wall. He struck the clapboards. Fierce heads looked out, small bodies pivoted. We rose to go. Sunset blazed on the windows. Blueberries. You ought to have seen what I saw on my way to the village, through Mortenson's pasture today. Blueberries, as big as the end of your thumb, real sky blue, and heavy, and ready to drum in the cavernous pail of the first one to come. And all ripe together, not some of them green and some of them ripe. You ought to have seen. I don't know what part of the pasture you mean. You know, where they cut off the woods. Let me see, it was 2 years ago, or no, can it be no longer than that? And the following fall the fire ran and burned it all up but the wall. Why, there hasn't been time for the bushes to grow. That's always the way with the blueberries, though. There may not have been the ghost of a sign of them anywhere under the shade of the pine, but get the pine out of the way, you may burn the pasture all over until the fern or grass blade is left. Not to mention a stick, and presto, they're up all around you, as thick and hard to explain as a conjurer's trick. It must be on charcoal they fatten their fruit. I taste in them sometimes the flavor is soot. And after all, really, they're ebony-skinned. The blue's but a mist from the breath of the wind, a tarnish that goes at a touch of the hand, and less than the tan with which pickers are tanned. Does Mortenson know what he has, do you think? He may, and not care, and so leave the chewink to gather them for him. You know what he is. He won't make the fact that they're rightfully his an excuse for keeping us other folk out. I wonder you didn't see Lauren about. The best of it was that I did. Do you know, I was just getting through what the field had to show, and over the wall and into the road, when who should come by? with a Democrat load of all the young chattering Lorens alive, but Loren, the fatherly, out for a drive. He saw you then? What did you do? Did he frown? He just kept nodding his head up and down. You know how politely he always goes by. But he thought a big thought I could tell by his eye, which, being expressed, might be in this effect. I have left those there berries, I shrewdly suspect, to ripen too long. I am greatly to blame. He's a thriftier person than some I could name. He seems to be thrifty. And hasn't he need, with all the mouths of those young Lorens to feed? He has brought them all up on wild berries, they say, like birds. They store a great many away. They eat them the year round, and those that they don't eat they sell in the store and buy shoes for their feet. Who cares what they say? It's nice to live, just taking what nature is willing to give, not forcing her hand with harrow and plough. I wish you had seen his perpetual bow, and the air of the youngsters. Not one of them turn, and they look so solemn, absurdly concerned. I wish I knew half of what the flock of them know, of where all those berries and other things grow. Cranberries and bogs and raspberries up on top of the boulder-strewn mountain, and when they will crop. I met them one day, and each had a flower stuck into his berries, as fresh as a shower. Some strange kind. They told me it hadn't a name. I've told you once, not long after we came, I almost provoked poor Loren to mirth by going to him of all people on earth to ask if he knew any fruit to be had for the picking. The rascal, he said he'd be glad to tell me if he knew. But the year had been bad. There had been some berries, but those were all gone. He didn't say where they had been. He went on, I'm sure, as polite as could be. He spoke to his wife in the door. Let me see, ma'am. We don't know any good berrying place? It was all he could do to keep a straight face. If he thinks all the fruit that grows wild is for him, he'll find he's mistaken. See here, for a whim, we'll pick in the Mortensons' pasture this year. We'll go in the morning, that is. If it's clear and the sun shines out warm, the vines must be wet. It's so long since I picked, I almost forget how we used to pick berries. We took one look round, then sank out of sight like trolls underground, and saw nothing more of each other or heard, unless when you said I was keeping a bird away from its nest, and I said, it was you. Well, one of us is. For complaining, it flew around and around us. And then, for a while, we picked till I feared you had wandered a mile, and I thought I'd lost you. I lifted a shout too loud for the distance you were, it turned out, for when you made answer, your voice was as low as talking. You stood up beside me, you know. We shan't have the place to ourselves to enjoy, not likely, when all the young Lorens deploy. They'll be there tomorrow, or even tonight. They won't be too friendly, they may be polite. To people they look on as having no right to pick where they're picking. But we won't complain. You ought to have seen how it looked in the rain, the fruit mixed with the water in layers of leaves, like two kinds of jewels, a vision for thieves. A servant to servants. I didn't make you know how glad I was to have you come and camp here on our land. I promised myself to get down some day and see the way you lived, but I don't know. With a house full of hungry men to feed, I guess you'll find, it seems to me I can't express my feelings any more than I can raise my voice or want to lift my hand. Oh, I can lift it when I have to. Do you ever feel so? I hope you never. It's got so I don't even know for sure whether I'm glad, sorry, or anything. There's nothing but a voice-like left inside that seems to tell me how I ought to feel and would feel if I wasn't all gone wrong. You take the lake. I look and look at it. I see it's a fair, pretty sheet of water. I stand and make myself repeat out loud the advantages it has, so long and narrow, like a deep piece of some old running river cut short off at both ends. It lies 5 miles straight away through the mountain notch from the sink window where I wash the plates, and all our storms come up towards the